Good. Okay, so back Colossians chapter 4, verse 8 and 9. I just want to read those verses again to you. Of course, the Apostle Paul is the author of the book of Colossians, and he's writing to the church of Colossae. The Colossians was a group of people in the town of Colossae that made up a church, and he's writing to them, and he tells them at the end of verse 8, "Comfort your hearts with Onesimus, a faithful and beloved brother who is one of you." So Onesimus was a man who was a member of this church. Whether he was an official member or whether he was just someone who attended this church, the Apostle Paul is writing unto the Colossians, and he's telling them to remember Onesimus. Remember the man that is amongst you, the man that has fallen and who has gotten back up on his feet and who is now a part of your church again. Remember him and comfort your hearts with Onesimus. So we got to know a little bit about Onesimus. Onesimus was a slave of a Christian named Philemon. And when I say the word slave, I don't mean a slave like we think of during the Civil War era that was treated unkindly or viciously and unchristlike. Well, a slave in Bible times was simply a servant. So he would be more like a butler. So Onesimus was like the butler, the maid, or not the maid, but the servant of a man by the name of Philemon. Philemon was, from what we can tell, a wealthy businessman in the town of Colossae, where the church was located. So here's Onesimus. He's the servant or the butler of Philemon. Philemon was a wealthy businessman who lived in Colossae and who was a part of the church of Colossae, or the church of the Colossians. And Onesimus was part of the church. He was either, whether by just attending with his boss, so to speak, Philemon, whether he just attended with Philemon at the church, or whether he was actually a member, we're not quite sure of. But he was one of the Colossians. He was one of them, according to that verse 9, which we just read. So just a little bit of a background here as we're building on this. Onesimus was a slave or a butler of a Christian man named Philemon who lived in Colossae. And he was probably more than likely a member of that church there in Colossae with Philemon. Now we do have a book of Philemon that is written about this story. We won't go through that book this morning, but we'll just give you a bit of an introduction to it. And I will be referencing one verse from that book in just a moment. So here's what happened. One day, Onesimus decided that he was in need of something. We're not told what it is. It could have possibly been money. It could have possibly been an object. We're not quite sure, but my guess would be monetary. But Onesimus was in need of something. And instead of going to his boss or his master, Philemon, maybe he had, and maybe Philemon told him no, we're not sure of the story, but Onesimus had a need. And he had a need that he felt that the only way to meet that need was to do wrong. And to take that which he did not have permission to take. So Onesimus, here as a slave or as the butler of Philemon, he took something without Philemon's permission. And it had to have been something more than like a stick of gum, okay? Whatever it was significant. Philemon found out about it, and at that point, Onesimus took off. The moment he realized Philemon knew about what he had stolen, what he had taken, he says, I can't hang around here. And so Onesimus takes off, and he runs. He leaves Philemon, and he escapes. Well, he's on the run as a fugitive. He has committed a crime, although he hasn't been prosecuted for it, but Philemon definitely has that authority to do that, and actually even further than that, he probably has the right to, according to some of the laws in that day, to even have him as a slave owner or as a master, to have him probably executed. I wouldn't say that that was his intention as a Christian businessman, that he would have done that, but that surely was happening during those times when someone committed a crime. So, make a long story short, whatever it was, Philemon found out about it. Onesimus takes off running. Onesimus is on the run. We're not told for how long, but you know that verse, be sure your sin will find you out? Onesimus couldn't hide forever, and his sin was found out. We're not told much about how he was arrested and tried and convicted, but we do know that he was arrested and he was put in jail. He was put in prison, and it just so happens he was put in the same prison where the Apostle Paul was in prison. Apostle Paul had been put into jail for preaching the gospel, not for doing anything wrong, not for doing anything sinful. Paul was preaching the gospel, preaching that Christ was the only way. He was persecuted and thrown into prison. Well, Onesimus just happened to be caught. Coincidences? No. God's working behind the scenes here. Onesimus happened to be caught in the same jurisdiction where Paul was in prison, and Onesimus was put into the same prison, perhaps even the same cell as Paul. So here's Onesimus. He is stolen from his master, Christian businessman Philemon, probably money and probably a good amount. He's stolen from him. He's on the run now, and then he's caught, then he's put into jail, and he becomes acquainted with Paul. We're not really giving the information of whether Paul and Onesimus knew each other. My guess is that they knew each other. I believe Philemon was one of Paul's first converts in Colossae, and Paul went throughout the world preaching the gospel, and he led people to Christ and established churches, and no doubt the Colossian church was established by the efforts of Paul winning people to Christ in that town. So more than likely Philemon was one of Paul's converts, and so if he knew Philemon, there's a good chance he knew of his butler or his slave Onesimus. But that's not the point, whether they knew each other before they were acquainted in prison or not, or met in prison is not important. So here's Onesimus. He's now in jail with the Apostle Paul. Now what do you think the Apostle Paul is going to do? Yeah, I mean, what would you think that the Apostle Paul, we're going to have some stories. At midnight, him and Silas were singing and praising God in jail when they were thrown in jail one time before, and then they preached the gospel to the guard there. So more than likely, Paul was preaching, sharing the gospel with every inmate that he came in contact with. And so Paul ends up leading Onesimus to Christ. Now, it's possible that Onesimus was saved, and then he fell and backslid and did what he did by stealing. But from the wording that I gather from the book of Philemon, which we're not going to read much of this morning, is that Onesimus was a part of the church, but not a true born-again Christian. But that's, again, speculation. But whatever the case, he got around Paul, and a few moments around Paul, he became a solid, committed Christian, without a doubt, when he was hanging around Paul. During that time together, Paul discipled him, encouraged him, and then Paul wrote this letter called Philemon, and he said, now Onesimus, in a few days you're getting out. I want you to take this letter. It's only one chapter. It's right after the book of Titus, before Hebrews. And he says, I want you to take this letter, and I want you to give this to Philemon. Paul wrote a letter to Philemon and says, Onesimus, I want you to go back to Philemon. I want you to tell him you're sorry, ask for his forgiveness, and give him this letter. It's a great little letter that I would encourage you to read maybe this week to help you understand this message this morning. So Onesimus takes that letter that Paul wrote. He goes back to his master, to the person that he wronged, Philemon, and gives him that letter. There's a verse in that letter that I want to share with you that is very important to today's message. It's Philemon chapter 1, verse 11. It's right there in your handout. It says, Paul writing to Philemon, which in time past was to thee unprofitable, but now profitable to thee and to me. Onesimus goes from unprofitable to profitable. That verse 11, that's what he's referring to. He's referring to Onesimus. And so in this letter, Paul writes about Onesimus, as Onesimus would be the one to carry this letter back to Philemon. And verse 11, he says, which in time past was to thee unprofitable. Paul was saying to Philemon, Onesimus was unprofitable to you because of what he did. But now profitable to thee and to me. Paul was saying to Philemon, okay, he may have been unprofitable in your sight because of what he did, but no longer is he unprofitable, he's profitable. And he's profitable to you, Philemon, and he's also profitable to me. And so that's the statement that Paul gives about this man Onesimus. So Onesimus goes from unprofitable to profitable because of the time spent under the influence of the Apostle Paul, or because of the fact that he had been converted and saved and really born again, and really placing his faith in Jesus Christ. I want to say this morning, and to all of us here, your past may make you feel unprofitable, but God sees you as profitable. Your past may make you feel unprofitable. You may think back, well, 10 years ago I did this. Oh, when I was a teenager I did this. When I was out of church and not serving Christ and not saved, I did this. Well, Onesimus messed up too. Onesimus committed a sin, committed a crime, and was unprofitable to Philemon. But Paul realized that, hey, when someone becomes forgiven by God Almighty, when someone has been converted and has been given a new chance at life and becomes a new creature in Christ Jesus, then they are no longer unprofitable. God sees that person as profitable. And so this morning, maybe you're Onesimus. Maybe you've done something that could be said, well, in the realms of Christianity, I'm unprofitable now because I've blown it. I blew it. I messed up. I rebelled against the Bible. I rebelled against God. I've done things that I regret. And that may be you. You may be like Onesimus. I have good news for you. When God forgives, He also erases. God forgets in the sense that all your sins are wiped clean. Your sins He will no more remember. He says He puts them behind His back. Now when Onesimus got saved, whether it was his past sins or his present sins or the sins that he would commit in the future, God says, listen, I'm forgiving you of your sin debt, of your record, and I no longer see you as an unprofitable, wicked sinner. I see you now as a profitable saint of God, as a child of God. And if you're here this morning, don't let your past beat you up. Don't let your past be an anchor that keeps you down. Listen, if you place your faith in Jesus Christ, God has forgiven you of all of the things that you've committed, and you are profitable to Him. So, your past make you feel unprofitable, but God sees you as profitable. Now, the Colossians knew who Onesimus was. Onesimus messed up. Onesimus was basically the prodigal, if you will, of the Colossian church. He messed up, he stole, he committed a crime, and he ran away. I can imagine the first Sunday after it happened, people came to church and they were, hey, where's Onesimus? Why is he not here? Then after a while, word got out what had happened, sure. And I know people, I'm sure there were some people in that class in church that were judgmental, that were saying, well, that rascal, that rebel, man, he deserves to be judgment. He deserves to be thrown into prison. I'm sure there were probably some people that were critical and judgmental. That shouldn't be the spirit of a Christian, because that's not the spirit of Christ. But I know people. I'm sure there were probably a group of people in that church that were like that. I'm sure there were a group in that church that were concerned that maybe they had grown in a relationship, and maybe that Onesimus was that person that they looked forward to shaking his hand. Maybe they looked forward to having a fellowship dinner with him. But they knew, these people, these Colossians knew Onesimus, and I'm sure there were some people that were honestly concerned and honestly missing Onesimus. So the Colossians knew him. So when you think of, now you got the background of the story. When Paul writes to this Colossian church and tells them to comfort your hearts with Onesimus, who is a faithful and beloved brother. What was he saying? See, they knew the whole story. They knew who Onesimus was. They knew what he did. They knew also the forgiveness and the grace and the mercy that had been extended to him. And so what Paul was saying, hey, I want you to comfort your hearts with Onesimus. He was saying, I want you to remember that God is the God of second chances. Don't you remember Onesimus? Don't you remember what he did? Don't you remember that he was running from the sin that he had committed, but God met him where he was. God met him there in prison, and God changed his life, and God gave him a second chance. And now he is a faithful and beloved brother. Remember him. He was writing to the Colossians church to comfort them and to encourage them. Hey, maybe you've messed up there in that Colossian church. Maybe you have done some things that you're not proud of or you're ashamed of. Don't forget Onesimus. He did as well, and yet he's recovered, and he's back up on his feet. Now he's a faithful brother serving Christ. Remember him. Remember that we serve a God of second chances. We serve a God of forgiveness and mercy and grace. And so that's the story behind this phrase, comfort your hearts with Onesimus. Now, the remainder of the message, I want you to be honest with yourself and to categorize yourself with one of three people. Okay? I'm going to give you three people. And I want you to, you may be all three, but I want you to really take to heart the character of one of these three that I will mention to you. The first one we're going to mention is Paul. Number one, we need more Pauls. We need more Pauls. Why do I say that? Why do I say we need more Pauls? Not just the fact we need more missionaries preaching the gospel. That's not what I'm referring to. In this context, I'm referring to we need more Christians like Paul who are willing to salvage and to restore someone who has messed up. You see what I'm saying here? Paul easily could have condemned Onesimus to, you dirty rat. How could you do that to my good friend Philemon? How could you steal from him? Don't even come near me. I don't want this man in my cell. He didn't condemn Onesimus. He saw this as an opportunity. Here is a man who has messed up. He's fallen. He's sinned. He's done wrong. And I'm not going to judge him, and I'm not going to point my finger at him, and I'm not going to put him down. No. I'm going to try to get him to realize what he's done, that he can be forgiven of it, and that he can be restored to full fellowship and full service for God. That's what we need. We need more Pauls. We need more people that will go to a Christian who is backslidden, who is away from God, who is messed up their lives by getting involved in things that they shouldn't be involved in. We need people to say, listen, I'm praying for you, and I want to encourage you. God has better for you. God has a forgiving God. He's a merciful God. He's a graceful God. And I know you've messed up. I know you've done wrong. But you can be used again. You can be a faithful, beloved brother again. You can go back to your place where you once were and be profitable again. Don't you love that? And I love that type of a spirit with Paul. Now, listen, Paul was a passionate man. He passionately preached the gospel, and he was a fervent man, a fervent spirit. But yet, he also was a tender, compassionate man who knew how to treat a fallen saint Christ-like. I've heard this said, and unfortunately, in many cases this is true, and it's a shame on us that this would be true, but I've seen it. And here's the statement, that the church is the only army where we kick the dead, or where we kick the fallen. The church is the only army where we kick the fallen. I've seen it over and over again where a Christian falls, commits a sin, does something he shouldn't do, and then while he's down there, we kick him and say, hey, good, stay down. Don't you ever come back to our church. Get on social media. Did you see what so-and-so did? I knew he wasn't a true Christian. I knew he was just, he was just a Pharisee and that he played the part. I knew he wasn't real. That's a shame. That should not go on in the family of God. But when someone falls, they're hurting, they're down. Sin has brought them to a place of darkness, a place where they're imprisoned now. Hey, it's not the time to kick them and rub their face in it and continue bringing up, yes, well, you get what you deserve and be uncompassionate and judgmental. Paul was not that type of Christian. Paul was a godly man who saw Onesimus with being in a dark place, realizing that nothing he said as far as condemning him would turn things around. Onesimus already was convicted. He was already facing the penalty for his consequences. Paul says, okay, Onesimus, you're here. You don't have to stay here. You serve a God of mercy, of grace, of forgiveness. And once you're out of here, you can be used. And you can go on to be a profitable servant of Christ. That's good news. We need more Pauls. I hope and pray that you'll be a Paul this morning. I hope and pray that you'll be an agent that is used of God to try to restore people to a proper relationship with Christ. So we need more Pauls. That's number one. Number two is Philemon, we need you to forgive. Philemon, we need you to forgive. Maybe you're going to be a Paul this morning and you're going to be that person that God uses to restore the offender, the Onesimus, the backsliding Christian, the Christian that is fallen. Maybe you're going to be that Paul. But it could very well be that you're not Paul, but you're actually the Philemon. Now, I believe you can be both, Philemon and Paul. But maybe you're Philemon this morning. Maybe somebody has done you wrong. Maybe you know of Onesimus that sinned against you, that betrayed you, that committed a crime against you. Maybe you have been hurt and offended by Onesimus. You may be Philemon this morning. You may be that person that has been wronged. And you can choose to be a Philemon. Or you can just choose to be bitter, hold a grudge, unforgiving, and allow that to destroy you. Because it will. An unforgiving spirit, the root of bitterness, will spring up in you and defile not just you, but will defile those who are closest to you. So you have a choice to make if somebody has wronged you. Maybe it was a parent growing up that has done you wrong. Maybe it was a family member. When I say wrong, maybe they did something that was criminal. And just by holding a grudge and being unforgiven and being bitter and angry at that person is not going to, it's not going to punish that person. It's actually going to punish you as the Philemon. Now God has all authority, and God will make sure that people who do wrong will face consequences, and God is a God of justice, but He's the one that is in control of that. But I meet so many people that say, well, you don't know what so-and-so did to me. They'll never hear from me again. I'll never forgive them. And they hold a grudge and are bitter towards that person. And they think that by doing that, they're making that person that offended them suffer. But that's not what's happening. They're really the ones that are going to hurt or suffer from it. Unforgiveness. The Bible says that Satan gains an advantage over us when we're unforgiven. And we are ignorant of his devices to an unforgiven spirit. Philemon, we need you to forgive. Are you bitter this morning at someone? Are you holding a grudge towards someone? Is there someone that you haven't forgiven? I challenge you this morning, decide to be a Philemon. Decide to say, if God can forgive that person, then I can forgive, because I know God has forgiven me. I mean, if God has forgiven me of all my transgressions, all my sins, then what right do I have to not forgive somebody else that God also forgives? See what I'm saying? If God forgives that person, are you better than God not to forgive that person? But yet, it's hard to deal with these feelings. It's hard to be a Philemon. Philemon, are you willing to be... I almost decided whether or not to put this in here, but I put it in here, and I want you to just buckle your seatbelts for a minute. You're probably not going to like this, but this is the truth. In regards of being wronged. Philemon, are you willing to be wronged, even if it means that good will come out of it?
That's right.
Are you willing to be wronged if it means good will come out of it? Well, none of us can doubt that good came out of Onesimus being put into prison around the Apostle Paul and being transformed and going from being unprofitable to profitable. He went from being unprofitable to profitable. Why? Because of what he did to Philemon. That bad thing, that negative thing, that sin was actually turned into good. And only God can do that.
That's right.
Now, God doesn't approve of the sin. God doesn't, He's not the inventor of evil, and He doesn't push people to sin. God doesn't tempt anybody to sin. But God is powerful enough and mighty enough and gracious enough and loving enough to take someone that has sinned and bring good out of it, out of their life. He can change a person. And that's certainly what happened to Onesimus. Good came out of this bad situation. So I want to ask you, Philemon, are you willing to be wronged if it means that Onesimus gets saved? Are you willing to be wrong if it means that Onesimus becomes a mighty servant of God? Now, I can't say that Philemon would have said, yes, I'm willing to be wrong at the start, at the beginning, before all this happened. But we do know from the little book letter that Paul wrote to Philemon that Philemon did forgive, did accept Onesimus back into fellowship, and whether he put him in the same position or authority, we're not told that, but he did restore the relationship. We do know that. Are we willing to be wrong if it means that good will come out of it? Philemon, we need to forgive. Listen, I have people that have done wrong to me. I'm not exempt from this. And I can tell you that sometimes it's hard to forgive. But I can also tell you that it is possible, because He who lives within us is able to enable us to forgive. You get that? He who is living within us is able to enable us to forgive. We cannot do it in our own flesh, but Jesus Christ who lives in us, He can help us forgive that person. He can help you. And that's the road we need to take. Bitterness will destroy us. Not just emotionally, not just mentally, physically as well. It will destroy your health. Allow and just cause you to live a miserable life. The answer is to be a Philemon, to forgive. So we need more Pauls, for sure. And we need more Philemons. We need Philemon to forgive. And then third, Onesimus, God can still use you. Maybe you're not Paul this morning, and maybe you're not Philemon. Maybe you are Onesimus. Maybe you're living a life that is not right in the sight of God. Maybe you have committed a sin that you feel, oh, I'm done now. God can never do anything good with me. I messed up. Maybe you're that Onesimus. I got good news for Onesimus. You may have been unprofitable before, but if you ask forgiveness and confess your sins to God, He'll make you profitable. Now, I don't know if it's possible. I guess it is possible to be all three this morning. I don't know if it's possible. I guess you could be a Christian that's away from God, and yet God uses you to minister to another Christian to bring you back. But who are you this morning? Are you Paul? Who are you helping? Who are you trying to recover or to restore? Are you Philemon? Are you forgiving someone that has wronged you? Are you Onesimus? Do you need to confess to the Lord that you have done wrong? And He'll surely forgive you and put you on that road to be useful. I read that verse again for you. And when you understand the whole story, it's powerful what Paul was saying to this church at Colossae. He says unto the Colossians, whom I have sent unto you for the same purpose, that he might know your estate, and comfort your hearts with Onesimus, a faithful and beloved brother who is one of you. That ought to be our goal, is to encourage each other with each other's testimony. He's telling that church, remember Onesimus, remember what he did, remember how God saved him, remember how God forgave him, remember how God has restored him, and now look, he's an usher in church, or he's singing in the choir, he's a faithful brother, he's one of you there in that church. But remember, God forgave him, and God gave him another chance. That's where the encouragement comes. That's where the comfort comes this morning. Isn't it good that we serve a God of second chances, of third chances, of fourth chances, of fifth chance? The Bible says His mercies are new every morning. You may fail today, but tomorrow morning when you wake up, there'll be new mercy for you to get back up and to be that profitable servant that God desires you to be. And it's great to be part of a church where people realize that none of us have a right to brag. None of us can say, well, yeah, I've always been profitable. Since I was born, I was profitable. No, none of us can say that. At every point, every single one of us, we were unprofitable because we were away from God, we were unsaved, we were living in sin. But God changed our lives. God saved us, forgave us, has blessed us with an opportunity now to be profitable for Him. So we're all in the same boat. And that's why Paul says, remember Onesimus, that faithful blood brother, which is one of you. Hey, we're all alike. We're all in need of mercy. We're all in need of grace. We're all in need of forgiveness. And thankfully, we got a God who's willing to look beyond our faults, to love us with an unconditional love, to forgive us every wrong that we commit. Any good?
Yes.
Amen. Father, thank you so much for how good you are. Thank you.